Alright, dickheads, I'm your chunky messiah, Ethan, and I'm just here with, another one of those tabletop tall tales videos. I know it's been a little while since I did the Mastiff one, but, essentially I wasn't sure where to put that for, a while. I kept arguing myself whether or not I was going to put that on the Chunky Messiah channel or on the Chunky Messiah Plays channel, and that lasted for about a week, and then I got distracted with other stuff, and I tried to record this one several times, it just didn't go well. What this is all made of is, it's been a while, and also I've been to the opticians and found out I need glasses in the time since I did that one. So, here I am, with my glasses, looking like a friendly owl. Also, the name Tabletop Tall Tales, probably close to something else, almost certainly close to something else. I just, came up with it just when I finally decided to upload, that video to this channel. Yeah, there wasn't much thought into that one. The name might change at some point down the line if I think of a better one, but hasn't happened yet, and it's been a few weeks, so there you go. Right, so this time I'm going to be talking about another one of my player characters. Rather than a Malkavian, this time it's going to be my, as well as the name of the title's down there, isn't it? The title of the video suggests we're going to be talking about my 700-year-old Tzimisce, Vladislav Dracul. I believe I've mentioned him in passing a couple of times. I've tried to record this about 3 times, I think, and I keep getting bogged down into going into, terrifying amounts of detail about the Tzimisce clan itself. I'm going to try to avoid doing that. This time, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick introduction to what this character was, because he was an absurd gimmick character. I mean, I make absurd gimmick characters, that's kind of my thing. I come up with a dumb joke or a dumb gimmick, or some kind of a one-line synopsis to theme the character around, and then yeah, that's just what I do. I make these gimmick characters. That's just my whole thing. But yeah, so I'm going to explain this gimmick. I'm going to tell you who he was. And then I'm going to basically go through 2 stories that happened in the campaign where I played him. Bit of background, this character did actually... this was the only example I've ever been in of playing a campaign with a whole new party of player characters that is set after the events of a previous campaign. We play in our kind of custom version of New York a lot. A lot of different groups have played in this setting. But almost every single time when the majority of the player characters are dead, or when, it's a brand new thing, it's never set. Afterwards, it resets. This was the only time it didn't reset. I don't know why. It did make the campaign a bit weird, because we had to deal with stuff that our GM had intended, essentially for kind of leveled up characters, because he literally just kept going from the same... the same plan he had. So we had to deal with the fallout from what our party did, and this is the party that had Mastiff in it. We had to deal with the fallout from the Mastiff party, as well as dealing with kind of end of the world stuff, because he started introducing some aspects of Gehenna into the plot at that stage. So it was kind of weird and awkward. Did lead to a few funny things. Had kind of a weird Groundhog's Day thing going on for a good while, which was interesting. But yeah, that was kind of a nightmare. Anyway, it's the only example of that. But yeah, this is following on. This is the same setting, the same New York as the one where Mastiff died while trying to eat someone. Okay, so, couple of things about this character. First of all, as I said, he was 700 years old. Not quite true, he was closer to 750. And that was very important. He was about 750 years old. He was something like 8th or 9th gen, because I think 8th is the lowest or the best generation you can get at character creation. And I literally only gave him that much of a generation to justify the age he was, because there was no way he was going to be the basic starting generation of 13 after being alive for 700 years. There's no way, unless you were sired by someone who's deliberately watering down their own blood, a line of vampires deliberately watering down their generation, there's no way you're 13th gen, during the Battle of Hastings or whatever. That's just... I mean, he's a bit late in the Battle of Hastings, but you know what I mean? There's no way you were 13th gen if you're from that time period. Either because you've either eaten someone, or, yeah, just at that time, it would just be absurd. The series of events that would have to transpire to make you 13th gen in, 700 years before, 2018, so, and he was 750, so it was the Middle Ages, so to be 13th gen in the Middle Ages, it's insane circumstances to cause that. So he was... Yeah, he was a hard generation. He was 700 years old. He had a lot of flaws, he had a lot of peculiarities. Basically, I'll tell you what the character gimmick of him was, because this is a character, he had two gimmicks. He had a mechanical gimmick, and then he had kind of a character gimmick. The mechanical gimmick, of which itself kind of splits into two, is a lot easier to explain. Basically, when I decided to make Vladislav, the thought that was in my head was I wanted to play a character who had to solve everything with his discipline, because I wanted to see how much I could John Carpenter's The Thing my way out of, like, so many situations with vicissitude, because vicissitude is such a vague and open-ended and customizable discipline. It's insane. Like, I think the second dot of it just says you can craft flesh. That's it. Like, you can craft flesh, and you have to stay within, like, conservation of matter. Like, you can't add matter. You can take matter away, but you can't add it to it, so you've got what's there. And then, like, the third dot is you can do that to bone as well. But that's it. Like, you know what you have to roll to do it, but there's no hard limits on exactly what you can do, aside from this conservation of mass. And if the thing's alive, obviously there's limits on, you'll kill it eventually if you just keep stretching it or whatever, or you move its organs or whatever. Like, you'll kill it eventually. So I was curious as to what I could get away with, or what different problems I could solve purely through the application of a lot of vicissitude. So everything about this character, stat-wise, was built to maximize his ability with vicissitude. He had 5 dots in vicissitude, he had a shitload of dots in medicine, he had craft body, which I think is a specific skill and specialization you have to take in order to help you. Sorry, I got something in my eye. You have to take in order to help you with vicissitude specifically. He had, like, high strength and high, like, grapple, because sometimes, to do it in combat, you have to be able to grapple the fucker, so he had, like, good grapple skills. He had some other skills as well, like, he had tech, and he had some limited understanding of technology. He had a lot of dots in occult, actually, I remember as well. Yeah, he had a lot of dots in occult as well. But everything about him was built, basically, around this. And I also actually built in a problem for him. A lawful problem into his mechanics, which is he had an affliction known as Methuselah's Thirst. A Methuselah being one of the varying kind of age titles you get. I can't remember exactly where it is. I know it's on the higher end, but I don't know if it's above. I think it's if you're older than an elder, you're a Methuselah, or an elder is the next step. It's one of the two. I'm not sure which way around it is. But Methuselah's Thirst is something that afflicts vampires, basically from the age of 500 and up. It's not completely unheard of for vampires younger than that to get it, but generally, once you're over the age of 500, I think even mechanically, you kind of start rolling dice, essentially, to see if you've developed it. And what Methuselah's Thirst is you can only gain blood points back by eating people. Like, it basically kind of turns you into exactly what the Sabbat is scared the antediluvians are. A vampire that needs to feed on its children. Well, not its children, but feed on other vampires in order to survive. Which, not exactly a crime, however, it makes people really not trust you. And I won't get into it, but I solved that very quickly with his vicissitude. I basically made what I called, like, feeding tanks. I won't go into details about how it worked, but it involved a blood tank that was made out of a gold cow, and then a few sets of what was essentially a human who was kind of human centipeded onto a vampire who was then attached to the blood tank cow, and that basically the human got, like, fed through a tube, and it had, like, a weird pipe connecting its arse and its dick to the sewer, so that, like, sewage just left, and the vampire had like its fangs, like, forgot to bring the mic down. It probably sounded fine. This is not, yeah. But the vampire also had, like, its fangs, like, in the, like, ankle. It was gross, and it genuinely made the GM lose his shit at me, because we hit upon something there, like, very specifically that unsettled him. He didn't like that one bit. He let me get away with it, but he basically, after that point, was like, just don't tell me if you're going to do stuff like that, just tell me what the vicissitude does, don't go into details. Like, okay, I'm sorry. But yeah, no, I got over that. But yeah, the gimmick mechanically was that I'm going to solve everything with vicissitude regardless of what the problem is. I'm going to solve it with vicissitude if I can. I did. And the two stories I have are situations in which I solved a problem I really shouldn't have been able to solve with vicissitude. Although, No, wait, no. I was about to say, I don't... Weirdly, actually, it occurs to me, they are both... it's really one story and one very brief anecdote. Really. And one of those stories, I basically do just use Vicissitude. I use Vicissitude the same way twice. There's other stories to this guy, but these are like the two that stick out. The character gimmick, the role-playing gimmick, was that it's a Camarilla campaign. And he was a flesh-crafting Tzimisce. And anyone who's familiar with the setting of V20, with the old Vampire the Masquerade setting before V5, is probably looking at me funny. When I say I played a 700-year-old Camarilla-aligned Tzimisce flesh crafter. Because while I've never been able to find anything explicitly stating why this is, that doesn't happen. The flesh crafting Tzimisce do not join the Camarilla. I've never seen a lore thing telling us why, like explaining that it's a hard and fast rule that like for this reason none of them have ever joined the Camarilla. But I have found things that say it just doesn't happen. Like they do not join the Camarilla. We're not telling you why, but they do not join the Camarilla. Yeah, so he's kind of a lawbreak because he joined the Camarilla and was allowed to join the Camarilla. My explanation for why he was able to join the Camarilla is literally his age. Because the Sabbat and the Camarilla aren't all that old in the grand scheme of things. I think they're about 500 years old, maybe younger than that. They're not old organizations. They came out of essentially two events called I think the Sabbat came out of one of the Anarch rebellions, yet weirdly the Sabbat came out of something called an Anarch rebellion. Don't know. And the Camarilla, I can't even remember when that formed, but that formed a bit later, I think. And yeah, so like that's after Vladislav was around, and my explanation was basically that Vladislav was an isolationist, and he didn't really care about vampire politics. So what essentially my explanation was, he started caring now because he's now a player character, and that when he looked at it, he thought the Camarilla was more reasonable, even though basically his entire clan is aligned with the Sabbat. He looked at the Camarilla and the Sabbat and went, well, they're murder hobos and I'm 8 humanity. Yeah, he started on 8 humanity. Boom. I know. This guy was like, he's kind of a Mary Sue. I've been told that he's, not a Mary Sue, but like he was, I've been told that he was a bit of a special snowflake because of all the like special exceptions he had. The only reason my GM let me get away with it, because he was like, well, you role played it. Like he didn't cause problems. Like you role played it in such a way as made sense. So sure. Fine, because he knows I love my gimmick character, so he let me get away with it. In fact, I'm playing a gimmick character in my next vampire game. Literally, I'm going to be at, like, in 2 days at time of recording. Where I'm playing, like, a very, like, London, broad, Cockney accent punk Nosferatu. Yeah, I play dumb gimmick characters, is my thing. But, yeah, no, my thing was basically he was high humanity and he was rational, and he wasn't a murder hobo. So when he looked at the modern Sabbat compared to the modern Camarilla, he was like, yeah, I'm gonna go with the guys with the towers and the laws, as opposed to the packs of murderers. Cheers. And he went and joined the Camarilla. He was hated, and no one trusted him, but he joined the Camarilla. Okay. Now, I'm gonna get into these stories. I'm actually gonna... You know what? I'm gonna fuse two of the stories together, because it just occurred to me to tell you another one. So what I'm gonna tell you the action-packed one first. The one where I did a lot of vicissitude to do silly shit, which I shouldn't have been able to get away with. And then I'm gonna tell you the funny one, which was basically a cultural clash between the Toreador between the Toreadors and an interesting aspect of Tzimisce culture, which I believe I touched upon in the Andre fight in the Let's Play in the series. Which is the hospitality rules. But I'll talk about that at the end. Like, that'll be how I lead this out, because it's a nice karma story. The first thing I'm going to tell you about is basically how I used vicissitude, and really only vicissitude, to basically stop a war that, if it had happened, would have ended the world, because it would have woken up an antediluvian. And it was a war between, I believe, India and China over Pakistan, or something like that, or over this, like, other country. It was a war between these two powers over this other country. Yeah, I did that with vicissitude. So, the situation, as I remember it, this was a while ago, I don't remember all the details. Basically, we're going through the Gehenna stuff. We're running through like modified versions of the End of Times, the Final Night's events. We've just gone through this entire plot line of this kind of Groundhog Day repeating shit, where we're interacting with the Tzimisce, antediluvian Tzimisce, who, in case you're curious, is a giant flesh cathedral that is underneath New York. He turned himself into a literal flesh cathedral and lived under New York. I won't get into details, but we ended up repeatedly, because when we died, it reset the day. Vladislav repeatedly essentially jumped into the heart of Tzimisce, went through these like hallucinatory memories of Tzimisce, and went to the fucking Tower of Babel, and repeatedly went in there and learned like a shitload of languages, which meant he was 750 years old. Technically, he was 950 years old in terms of what he'd experienced, because he spent a long time in the memories of... He spent roughly that long in the memories of Tzimisce, repeatedly going through the Tower of Babel and learning a load of things. Like, he could read a bunch of dead languages by the time he came out of there, because he was a scholar. That's another thing, actually. Vladislav was a nodist scholar. Which means he studied the myth of Cain and the lore of the antediluvians, which is why he had so many dots in a cult, and that was kind of his thing. He kept this huge collection of nodist artifacts. Which doesn't come into this story, but it comes into the one with the Toreador later on. I should also actually tell you what he looked like. He had like a horrible war form, but yeah, most of the time he appeared as like this 9-foot tall dude with this really tall head with like spiky white hair, a big drooping white moustache, long hooked nose, long creepy fingers, and you could never see his feet because he wore these like long black and red robes and big red gemstones and shit on rings. Like, he looked like a very evil vampire. And actually, one of the jokes about him was that he was where a lot of the Dracula stereotypes came from. Not true, Dracula exists in Vampire the Masquerade, but, like, that was just a joke at the table. Yeah. But no, so, this war... Sorry, I'm getting distracted. This war. We're going through the Gehenna stuff. We've just done this Groundhog Day thing, which was Tzimisce. That was dealing with the Tzimisce antediluvian. And now, I believe, we're trying to stop, like, Ravnos or something from waking up. Like, we're trying to stop another one of these guys from waking up. And I can't remember which one it fucking was. But we find out that one of the antediluvians is sleeping in a temple in a small country that is currently being debated over by India and China, and that if it turns into a war, they'll fight in the country, and the violence will wake up the antediluvian, and whoops, it's another apocalypse. So we're desperately trying to stop that from happening, and so we are in India dealing with, because that's where the negotiations are happening. We also went there trying to figure out what was going on with the Ravnos, because the Ravnos had just started disappearing, and we got there, and it turns out they were all, like, starving to death. And yeah, it wasn't great. I think, like, we met, like, a bunch of starving, dying Ravnos, and their leader was just like, please kill me! And Vladislav was like, of course I'll kill you, come here! And he just killed him. Yeah, the voice I did for Vladislav was my impression of Londo Malari from Babylon 5. I do, like, broad, stupid, cartoony voices for my characters, because you know what? A broad, stupid voice is better than no voice at all, if you ask me. But yeah, so we're in there, and we weren't looking for these Ravnos, but we've hit upon this quest line, which is essentially we need to figure out how to deal with this problem. And we had, on one side, we had the Indian ambassador, the Indian diplomat, who was dealing with it, who, I swear to God, I don't think we ever even looked at him for more than a second. Like, we just, for some reason, I don't know why, we did not follow up on that guy at all. Turns out we didn't need to, but we just didn't follow up on the Indian ambassador. Don't know why. Couldn't tell you. Who we did decide on following up on, though, was the Chinese ambassador, the Chinese diplomat. We decided to kind of see what was going on with him. And we basically... I can't remember what the party was made. I think there was only two of us at that stage. And I think one of us was a Trujar, maybe. A true Bruja. They have, like, a time power. I think they were that. I can't actually remember what the other player was. Because, quite frankly, it kind of turned into the Ethan Vladislav show for a while in India, so I genuinely can't remember what they were. It makes me sound like a dick, and yeah, kind of dickish that I just kind of let that turn into just my game for a while, but I can't remember what this other character was. But yeah, so we decided to go looking into... What I do know is this character had an interesting relationship with time, which is why I assume they were true Bruhal. They had a weird flaw, or merit, I can't remember which one it was, that'll come into it. But yeah, so we decided to look into this issue, this Chinese diplomat, with our plan essentially being either to talk him out of this war, to have him back down, or to replace him. The problem being that if we were to replace him, Vladislav would need to suddenly get very good at Chinese, a language he doesn't speak, or at least a Chinese accent, and know about this guy and the country's policy. Like, there were reasons why we didn't want to just replace him. I mean, we knew that even if we had to replace him, even without his knowledge, basically, we found out that if we replaced him and it was on camera, him saying they'd pull out, the Chinese government would have to do it. I assume for plot reasons. Basically, it was just so we had a way to win that. But yeah, so we found that out. So we go to the Chinese embassy, and we're kind of sneaking around. We just go in through the front door the first time. We just kind of walk in at night, so we are immediately suspicious, especially when you remember what the hell Vladislav looks like. Like, we are a very suspicious pair. The Chinese guards do not like it. And we can't, like, talk our way in. I should say at this point that Vladislav could turn into a sentient pool of blood that could move under its own power and soak through substances that basically weren't lead. Vicissitude is has a very strange suite of powers, and that's one of the options at 5 dots. Fucking magic moving pool of blood. Dunno. Didn't ask. But I make liberal use of that power. That is a frighteningly useful power if you think about it, which is actually the case for a lot of vicissitude powers. But we kind of go in through the front, and we can't get in. Like, we can't do it. And we're going in, and we find something interesting, where basically we find out 2 things. First, we find out that this guy, this Chinese diplomat, has his wife with him. And his wife sleeps in a different room. Like, they sleep in 2 different rooms. I don't think we ever found out why they sleep in 2 different rooms, but his wife sleeps in a different room. And we also found out that our Trujar, or whatever they were, the other party member, had this ability where they could see... I think it was a flaw, because it messed with their ability to tell what was going on at the time, but it occasionally gave us hints. Like it was a mitigated flaw, where basically they saw multiple different timelines at once. They saw like multiple different possible futures at the same time, overlapping with reality, which made it kind of difficult for them to figure out what was actually going on. But in this instance, it helped us a lot, because we're kind of going in and we're trying to figure out what to do. And as we're kind of walking around this place, like, we managed to sneak past the guards and we're looking around, and the Trujar, I'm just going to assume Trujar. I'm probably wrong, but I'm just going to assume Trujar. The Trujar is looking down this corridor. It's like, I'm like, what? What's up? And it's like, I can see a werewolf mauling you, but you just, like, responded really calmly, so I'm assuming you've not been mauled by a werewolf. His wife was a werewolf. I'm really glad we never woke her up, because she would fuck me up. I talk about this at some stage in the vampire videos. The videos are... I've finished recording the Let's Play, by the way. It's done. 47 episodes, turns out. I'm probably uploading this before I'm anywhere near the end, so there is a moment where werewolves enter into that game. If you don't know, I talk about the werewolves a lot, but werewolves, all you need to know is werewolves instinctually hate vampires. Like, they can smell it on you, and they hate you. So they go into, like, werewolf frenzy, and werewolves are infinitely more badass than vampires are. Like, werewolves are you lose in Vampire the Masquerade. Like, if you see a werewolf, you fucking get away from it. Like, you just try to get away from it and pray it can't catch you. That's how, like, hardcore a problem werewolves are. So we found that out, and we're like, okay, the direct approach won't work, because we'll wake up his wife, and his wife will eat me. So we decided to do something else, believe it or not. And what we decided to do is, we decided to take advantage of the fact that we noticed there's ventilation in this building, because of course there is. It's fucking India. Jesus Christ, they'd be dying if it wasn't in the heat of that country if there was no ventilation. So we realised there's, like, a ventilation system in this embassy. And so what we decided to do is we decide that because dear old Vladislav can turn into a puddle o' blood that moves under its own power, what we decide to do is we decide that I'm going to quickly take a drink here, my throat's getting a bit dry. I just recorded, like, a lot more videos than I recorded 5 videos today, which is a lot more than I normally do. Sorry about the horrible noise. I've been very productive today. So my throat's, like, not doing well. But, yeah, no, we decide that we're gonna sneak in, because Vladislav can turn to this fucking puddle of blood, and we decide to go in through the vents. I think we talked to an NPC who also might have given us this idea, and told us explicitly to stay out of Mexico. It's not a law thing. This is like a weird, like an old, incredibly broken player character that our GM came up with, and he likes bringing as like a scary NPC who's never directly related to the plot, who just kind of turns up and just kind of goes, boom, motherfucker, and then leaves. He told us to stay out of Mexico. We weren't going to Mexico anyway. Mexico's controlled by the Sabbat. Fucking A. And Camarilla, you know. So we decided to do us a sneak through this embassy. So I get in, and I'm, puddle of blood, and I'm like slopping around in the sewers, and I find my way in, and I slop up the vents and into the systems, and I'm slopping around looking for the guy, and I like find his wife's room, and his wife twitches in her sleep, and I'm frightened, and I move the fuck on, and then I find his room. And actually, at some point before then, I believe I also went to the security room. And, interesting thing, it's very hard to damage a Tzimisce who's turned into blood. Because he's blood. Like, you can hit it, and you can stab it, and you can cut it, and you can do whatever, and it won't hurt it. It just won't. You can't hurt it. There are 2 ways that you can very badly, however, injure. Like, it's invulnerable to a lot of damage. However, there's a couple of ways you can fuck it up. Number 1, drink it. Drinking it will fuck up the guy. Like, because he'll just be missing part of him. Like, fuck. It makes reforming a bastard because of the Tzimisce's rule of conservation of matter. So if you drink some of it, he's going to reform missing an arm. Do you know what I mean? Like, part of it, he's not going to have enough to reform fully. He's going to have to reform weirdly. Oddly, someone was horribly injured at one stage, and they barely survived. One of the party, and Vladislav, in order to basically allow them to walk, reshaped them into the body of a little girl. Because there wasn't enough matter to make them into, like, a person, like a full-sized adult. So they reshaped them into a little girl, and then over the course of, like, however long, like, the weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks it took them to regenerate all the aggro damage they took, he would just, like, slowly adjust. So they, like, built back up to their correct height. It was very silly. Very silly, but that's kind of how those systems would interact. I think if he hadn't done that, it would have actually damaged them. Like, it would have done more damage to them and possibly killed them if he hadn't, like, readjusted them over that length of time. Anyway. So we get to the security room, and, I was telling you about the damage. Drinking them fucks them up. The other way that you can fuck them up is burning them. They are still very easily burned. I believe burning them does aggro damage. You can also electrocute them, which hurts, but I think it only does lethal damage. So what I basically had Vladislav do was, in order to not set off the security, not to get caught on camera, slop his way through the vents into the security room and bleed all over the security console. And, like, the camera setup. So it couldn't, like, receive anything. And he took a lot of lethal damage from that, but he was fine. And then he slopped his merry way. And he slopped his way into the room of this ambassador. And he reformed. And he had a merit, I think it was called Promethean Flesh. Which basically, the first dot of, basically Promethean Flesh allows you to fleshcraft your own body without, like, physically, like, in order to fleshcraft something, you have to, like, get all up in it, like, you have to get on it and just, like, fucking work it, like, you gotta work the meat, you know what I mean? So if you say wanted to make your finger longer, it's not just a matter of, haha, my finger's longer, it's like, right, let's get in, let's work it out, let's wank my finger off until it's, like, that long. Like, that's basically what fleshcrafting is. It's, like, it's literally molding and pulling and tearing until it's in the shape you want. Promethean Flesh, it's also incredibly painful, just so you're aware. But Promethean Flesh, I don't think it made it any less painful, But Promethean Flesh made it so, at least where your own body's concerned, you can just kind of go, whoopah, and you just instantly change, as opposed to having to go through this, like, right, fucking, just give me a minute, let me reshape my hand. Like, you just kind of, whoopah, you just do it. And the first dot of vicissitude allows you to basically shape your face, so you can, like, shape your face. So I used that and Promethean Flesh to, when I came down out of this vent, to basically whoopah him into, I think it was just a generic guy. I think it was just a generic guy, like just a Chinese dude, rather than anyone specific. And this guy wakes up. Like, I wake him up, and we have a conversation, and and I'm intimidating him. We're trying to do this shit. And I can't remember what we talk about, but we talk about some stuff, and we're like, okay. And we get down to this, we come to, like, an agreement. I believe it was, like, deal with, like, standard deal with X, and I'll give you Y. And he's like, deal with X, and then I'll listen to you. So we go off, and we do his mission. I slop away, I wait for him to go back to sleep. I think I walked out, actually. I think I might have just left. The thing is, he knew that I wasn't. No, he didn't find this out loud. Okay, but then I just left. We do the thing. We come back. And I go through the same system. However, this time he's, like, set it up in such a way that he's, like, mined the door. Like, he's protecting himself now because he doesn't know how I got in. And he's kind of amazed that I managed to get in. Like, he doesn't know how I got in. When I go in the second time, he's even more amazed. And we have another conversation, because I managed to get through even more security measures. He's like, you didn't get in through the door. That's the only entrance. There was no windows in this place. And he's like, how did you get in? And I was worried it was going to be a Masquerade breach, because this guy did not know how I was getting in, and I was getting frustrated with him. So I basically decided that because he was trying to introduce another thing we had to do before he'd cooperate, I, like, flesh crafted in front of him to turn into him, and basically just said, look, you can either do what we want you to do, or I'll do it. And he freaks out. But he doesn't freak out over magic. He doesn't think that I've magicked in front of him. What he thinks has happened is that I'm using some kind of advanced technology. Interesting interpretation. Understandable interpretation. Really understandable way to deal with seeing a dude just turn into you in front of you. I can't for the life of me remember how I... No, I can. I was going to say I can't for the life of me remember how I convinced him I was supernatural. Because basically, I can't remember the exact details of the negotiation with him, but essentially it ends up boiling down to he can't do what we want him to do. What he can do, however, is just leave. And leave us to do it. Leave me in his place, looking like him, with some information. And I basically had to intimidate him with magic, like, to prove to him I was a monster, and then let him hide. And I can't remember how we got to that point, but I know that, I'm pretty sure, in order to basically convince him I was magic, and not technology, I went into my Zulo war form. Gangrel, or anyone with Protean, has a war form. You see it all over the place in Vampire Masquerade Bloodlines. You can even unlock it if you're playing a Gangrel. It's like it's normally depicted as kind of a wolfman form, but it depends on kind of what animal you transform into if you're a Gangrel, like what animal you're aligned to. Like if you're aligned with ravens, you'll turn it like Raven Monster. If you're aligned with rats, you'll turn it into a fucking Skaven. Like the war form is like, it's based on that. But they get that, and so do Tzimisce. But theirs isn't an animal. Theirs is like a HR Geiger monster. Like, theirs is like a xenomorph. Like, they turn into a living flesh nightmare. And I think I turned into that to scare the shit. To put the fear of God into this man. To, like, terrify him. And he decides, yeah, fuck it. You've gotten in. I put mines down, you got around them. You've destroyed the security system. You have never opened that door. You can turn into me, and now you can turn into the devil himself. I don't know what you are. You're definitely not technology, but I, my brother, am out. And he literally, I believe, he, honest to God, we always wondered whether or not he ever double-crossed us. No, he told us he was vanishing. I intimidated him into telling us where he was going in case he ever double-crossed us. He said Sweden. I believe we checked. He actually went to Sweden. Like, he took him and his wife and, like, his shit and disappeared to Sweden. Like, we scared this guy so badly with this living, like, war form nightmare. I can't remember all the details about what Vladislav's war form nightmare looked like. But if I recall correctly, he had, like, knives instead of claws. He was black and leather, like, kind of skin like old black leather. His face had, like, horrible tendrils coming out of its head. It was just, like, a maw of, like, random jagged teeth, and there was kind of pincers going on in there, and he had, like, a shitload, like tens of horrible clicky-clacky legs that he scuttled around on. Like, I went into a lot of detail with how weird and creepy this dude's form was, because I was really into describing, like, how creepy his vicissitude shit was, because I'm an edgelord. Look at me. Of course I was really into that. I'm the kind of guy who if I kill a monster in D&D, or if I'm running a game and the party kills something, I'm like, do you want to know what happens to its viscera? You know what I mean? I'm the guy who, like, goes into all that fucking gory ass detail. So, like, I had this weird thing. And this guy fucking books it. Like, he takes his wife and he fucking leaves. Which leaves me in this position of now having to use vicissitude again. So now I've used vicissitude to sneak in, I've used vicissitude to intimidate him, I've used vicissitude to talk him into leaving, and now I need to use vicissitude to impersonate him. And do that. And Vladislav? Not much in the way of social skills. Did not have much in the way of social skills, now. Granted, this was partly metagaming on my part, because I know that at least in my group, I can count on one fucking hand the number of times this group, the GMs, regardless of who's running it, because we've all taken turns running games in our little group, I can count on one hand the number of times we've rolled for social things. So most of us, like, dump stat social, like, we do not put anything in our social stats, because we know that that's basically, it's irrelevant. Like, I try not to. I put, like, the lowest amount I can put in the social stats, and I try to make them roughly equivalent to what I'm going for with the character. But yeah, we role play out almost all the conversation. So the fact that he had, like, nothing there wasn't great. But it was, like, mostly fine. Weirdly, this was, like, one of the rare times I had to roll, because this was the second time we'd spoken to this guy. And while we agreed to do a job for him after the first conversation, it wasn't exactly a cordial conversation. It was just, we agreed to do a job for him. And, I mean, the fact that he mined the door, and there was otherwise heightened security as well, implies this guy wasn't on the level with us. Because it wasn't a great conversation. The first time. So, his guards were also on high alert, because this guy knew I could change my face. Because I had also changed my face in front of him the first time, and he thought that was tech. So he told his guards. Basically, he literally warned them that if he starts acting strange, it might not be him. It might be someone else. And I replace him, I put his clothes on. And I go out, and I'm like, call the Indian ambassador. We're having a meeting. These guards ask him a question, and it was something that I knew. Like we had been told it. It was like where he was going on holiday, or his kid's name, or something like that. And I didn't know. And I had to desperately roll my way out of being immediately killed. And even though I had very few, I think that was like a manipulation roll, like it was essentially a bluff check. I did really well, even though I had like 3 dice. I got like several 10s, which means I basically just barely squeaked through that check. And so we got through, and these guys don't trust me at all. Like, they're not sure I'm an imposter, and they've not heard anything from the real one. Like, they've got no, other than the fact that I was a bit evasive when they asked me something, they don't have any reason to they shoot me. But they don't quite fully believe I'm this guy. But they go along with it anyway. They just keep a guard with me, like an armed guard in the van. And we take an armoured van and we go talk to the Indian ambassador, and it's televised. Like, this was like the night of like the big meeting when they're going to announce their plans. So we go, and actually the actual discussion goes really well. I basically, Vladislav, he puts up a bit of a fight, a feigned fight. He puts up a bit of a fight over it, and then goes, you know what? Here's some concessions you can make to the Chinese government, like really easy concessions. and then we'll just leave it, and just both of us will walk away. And the Indian government agreed. Quest solved. And this was televised, the agreement to this. So, quest done. By the time we got back, later, we found out, yep, the guy, good as his word, the actual Chinese ambassador had fucking fled. Like, he disappeared to Sweden. Partially because he didn't want us coming after him, and also because he knew that after we did what we did, the Chinese government would be after him, because the Chinese government had no way to know that it wasn't him who did it. Because it was exact copy. He didn't have much in the way of charisma stats. You know what he did have, though? He had a great stats for flesh crafting. So it was a perfect copy physically, but not... Yeah, it wasn't great at bluffing. But as we're on the way back, we're sat in this armoured van, because we took an armoured van there, and there's this guard on the other side. Basically, I'm in an armoured car, and I'm like here, and the doors to the armoured car are there. And we're just kind of sat there, and this guard's looking at me, and, the guards knew that the instructions from China weren't to do what my character had just done. They knew my character had gone rogue. They thought that either that I was an imposter or the diplomat had gone rogue, and either way, that guy's probably not getting back to his embassy. Do you know what I mean? That guy's not getting home, either way. So we had this, one of my favourite moments in any game ever, was I'm sat across from this guy. This guy's, fingering his assault rifle. He's got, a... Just you wait, motherfucker, when we're far enough out from town. Pop, pop. And I'm sat there. I'm just like, oh no. You're gonna shoot me? I'm terrified. Let me get, a certain degree out. And, I remember distinctly, it's one of my favourite things I've ever done, is I just say, Vladislav just looked at him. Just right in the eyes and just goes, leans in, just goes, no one will ever believe you. Turns into a pool of blood and fucks off out of the cracks in the van. And this guy's just like, what? He shits himself as Vladislav just disappears. And I timed it such a way that he disappears and he immediately fucking scurries down a drain. He gets out of this van, falls into a drain, and bails. And we just get out of there as quickly as possible. We leave India. We are out after that. And we always wondered what happened to that guy. But that, I've just, no one will ever believe you. Melty! We always wondered, as a party, the GM refused to tell us, but we always wondered what happened to that guy. Probably killed, we assume. We assumed he was killed, or fired, but probably killed. Because what do you mean he disappeared? What do you mean he melted in front of you and vanished? You were a collaborator! That's what we assumed happened to this guy. Didn't have to take a humanity roll, though. Because we didn't know. We did not know that's what happened to him. And Vladislav could plead ignorance, because he has been living in Transylvania for 600 years and not paying attention to human politics. So, he did not know what China was like. Fantastic. Yeah. There was another story that I didn't tell. I'm going to tell the next one about the Toreador. But there was another one I didn't tell because I realised it was more or less the same thing of where I was sneaking away from I got an NPC that we've only ever known as Polish Knight because no one's ever been able to find out what his actual name is. Multiple campaigns have gone through where this guy's he's never a major player, but he's always a side character, and none of us have ever found out what this bloody dude's name is. Ever. No one. 7 parties have never, ever found out this guy's name. But yeah, at one point, I can't remember why, but Polish Knight was in the sewers, and he wasn't looking for Vladislav, but Vladislav didn't want to get caught, basically, in the sewers. So Vladislav was schlorping along the ceiling of the sewers in New York, and just desperately hoping that the dude didn't look up. He was just hiding in between the cracks in the ceiling as blood. But that's basically just the same story as the first one. Okay. So the next story, and the last one about Vladislav. There's other stories I could tell you about Vladislav. A lot of weird shit happened with this guy. But the other story I'll tell you about Vladislav, I might tell you more of them another time, as a bunch of assorted stories, maybe. But the other story I want to tell you is basically an extrapolation, an extension, an absurdity, born out of the meeting of 2 similar cultures that exist within the Tzimisce and the Tremere. Not the Tremere, the Toreador. the Tremere and the Tzimisce hate each other. The Toreador and the Tzimisce don't get along, but they do not hate each other anywhere near as much as the Tremere and the Tzimisce do, because Omen Wars, Google it. It's long story, the Omen Wars. Long story! The Tremere ate a vampire clan, and it's how they became the Tremere, and the Tzimisce were allied with the clan they ate. As actually with the Nosferatu. Interesting little lore point, that, actually. The historical allies of the Tzimisce is the Nosferatu clan. I always found that quite interesting. Also makes sense, historically, to think about it like that the elders of the Nosferatu clan will sell information to the Sabbat as well as the Camarilla, even though they're officially members of the Camarilla. Makes sense when you realise that a lot of their elders were probably aligned with the Tzimisce, who are now in charge of the Sabbat. But, basically, the Toreador, as you know, as I'm sure you know if you're familiar at all with the setting, are polite. Because they are etiquette, and they are social butterflies, and they are goodness and society and sociability, and they're good and polite and etiquette and great and nice. They will not be out-societied. The Tzimisce are also weirdly obsessed with etiquette. Because they are not just John Carpenter's The Thing. They are mostly John Carpenter's The Thing. But they are also Dracula. In fact, actually, I believe I mentioned earlier that Dracula does exist. He is also a Tzimisce. Like, Dracula is a Tzimisce. Like, the Tzimisce are where the Dracula stereotypes are. Because Dracula's even in them. You know, they're mostly Eastern European. A lot of them specifically from Romania and Transylvania. Yeah. Like, a lot of it is that. But they are, you know, so they are... they have an aspect of them that's not explored all that often, but is a definite part of them, which is this old blood, old world aristocracy. This kind of, you know, that kind of exotic but still European, Eastern European aristocracy vibe. That, welcome to my castle. You must stay the night. You know, that kind of shit is a very big deal for them. So they have the rules of hospitality, which is, basically, any Tzimisce, unless you're literally his, like, blood enemy, and even then, sometimes this will apply to you still. Any Tzimisce worth is salt. Any Tzimisce worth is blood. If you go into his home, politely, not as an invader, if you present yourself as a guest, has to follow their hospitality rules, which is essentially you have, I believe, 3 days. 3 days in which you are an honoured guest in the house of the Tzimisce. You are treated very well. He is kind and talkative to you. You know, he will share, you know, what is yours, what is his is yours. You know, very kind. Granted, after those 3 days, he's no longer bound to that, and he may very well kill you if he doesn't like you. But for those 3 days, obsessive. They have to follow this. It's a big deal for older Tzimisce. A very big deal indeed. Which is, I mean, that's the only one they all have to follow. But a lot of Tzimisce, even beyond that, are very fixated on etiquette, very fixated on politeness. So, with Vladislav, I decided to run with that. I decided to run with that as being kind of the means by which he would ingratiate himself to the Camarilla. Because he is aware that the Camarilla doesn't have many flesh-crafting Tzimisce, because it literally doesn't have any in it except for him in that game. And he's also aware that he is off-putting and scary, and people aren't going to like him. So I decided that he would basically lean very heavily into being incredibly polite. Incredibly polite. Which led to some interesting things, because a lot of the time people just didn't trust him, and they were still rude to him, but he was impeccably polite to them. But this ran into an interesting situation when recurring NPC, the Toreador Primogen, Goodwin, or as Mastiff called him in his radio broadcasts, Chatty Cathy, because he was just a massive gossip, this Primogen, he ran this museum, this ran into a bit of a peculiarity when he met Vladislav. And it started off small, because, essentially, this guy, even though he's a gossip, he also heard a lot. So he had some theories about what was going on with Vladislav. And I'd say the first time they met, Vladislav, he could, like, nose out what kind of blood he could drink. Like, he could smell what was vampire blood. He also should mention he had Unbondable, because anytime you drink a vampire's blood, you can get blood bound to them, unless you have the Unbondable merit, which means you cannot get blood bound. And Vladislav had Unbondable, because I wanted him to have a difficulty with Methuselah's Thirst, but I didn't want him hopelessly in love with every single person he fed off of. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, the first time we went to the Toreador, it's a very common thing, it's a very polite thing in Vampire Society, that when you speak to an elder, or when you visit an elder, when you're having a meeting, some blood will be provided. It's generally, like, maybe 1 blood point, mechanically. And it's, you know, it can be considered rude, depending on who it is, to not take it. So a lot of people I've known actually will get that, and if they've got full blood, they'll just go, fuck it, and they'll blood buff, and waste a blood point, so they can drink it, so they don't have to just vomit that blood back out immediately. So we went there, and, you know, it's always, like, human blood, and Goodwin specifically would always have it, like, human blood mixed with alcohol, because he was a Toreador, he enjoyed alcohol, he enjoyed the flavour, so he did that, and he offered this blood to his guests. And, when Vladislav was there, having his first meeting, 3 glasses of blood get brought out. And 2 of them get poured from, like, 1 bottle. And the third one, the one for Vladislav, gets poured from a different bottle. And, you know, the party, they take the glass and like, thank you, Primogen. Other guy, thank you, Primogen. Vladislav picks it up. I'm like, smell it a little bit. I asked the GM, like, does it smell like vampire blood? And the GM goes, yeah, that's vampire blood. And, I look at Goodwin. And Goodwin is, like, looking Vladislav in the eye. And they have a moment of, like, he's like, I know you know what it is. I want to see what you do. And Vladislav looks him in the eye and just goes, glug. Drops it down. Which is basically saying, yeah, and he specifically was like, like a toast. Yeah, glug. Which is basically saying, I know what this is. I know you know what this is, and that I need this. However, I'm letting you know that I'm going to take this, and I'm not afraid that this will do anything. So there's a little exchange of information there. You know, they had a little kind of passive-aggressive moment. But the thing is that Goodwin is a coward. And I like Goodwin. I like my GM for this thing, and I'm really excited actually because it's been a while since I've been in his game, and I've got a real love for not only the New York setting, but because he made it the way he plays his NPCs. And I love Goodwin. Like, I love so many of the NPCs in that setting, so I'm really excited to be going back there as this, like, punk Nosferatu. But Goodwin is a coward. So he knows this, but he's not going to do anything with it, because he hates confrontation. But it's just, you know, he knows that. And we move on. And the quests keep going. But as time goes on, I, on a whim, basically, decide to give Goodwin a gift. I can't remember what it was. It was just some little thing, like it was a sword or something. Or like a book that he had that was, like, of historical significance. And because Goodwin owned a museum, he was like, here you go. Ingratiating myself with the local Camarilla, being a good guy. However, that set off the Toreador. The Toreador did not like... He graciously accepted the gift. But Goodwin did not like being given a gift by a Tzimisce. Because that made the Tzimisce look like he was more polite than a Toreador. And that would not stand. And this led to a series of exchanges that were increasingly passive-aggressive. Increasingly passive-aggressive. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically had, over the course of this campaign, basically they would just one-up each other on the gifts they give. Like, Vladislav gave this guy just a book, like a historical book. And he's like, thank you, I take that. And then Goodwin, like, gave him a sword. A very nice sword. Like a very nice, like an engraved sword. And Vladislav was like, it is very nice, thank you, very good. And, however, then, when Vladislav got a gift back that was clearly so much better than the gift he had given Goodwin, he was like, I see what you're doing, Toreador. I will not lose. No one beats the Tzimisce at etiquette. So, he had to give a gift back. And I remember the gift he gave back. It was like an entire suit of armor. But it wasn't just a suit of armor, it was like a suit of... The way I describe it now is basically the armor that, like, the vampire count lords wear in Total War Warhammer. Which was, like, basically Vladislav's armor from when he was in the fucking Crusades. When he was a knight in his human life. And so, the Toreador gets that. It's like, this is a fantastic museum piece. This is impeccably maintained armor from centuries ago. I'm sweating. You know what I mean? Like, oh, God, I don't... Like, there's blood coming off in the fucking handkerchief. Because, you know, the vampires, they can sweat, but they sweat blood if they do. So it's like, oh, God. Whoo, what do I do? And you know what he gave him back? He was like, we gotta one-up him. Gotta one-up him. He gave him a magical artifact. I did not know how to deal with that. Because he gave him an artifact of the Setite clan, which was like a box that had a very powerful, like, magical amulet in it. And he was told, like, do not open the box. Like, here's the gift, do not open that box. Because if you put the amulet on, you get possessed by something, I recall correctly. There was a demon or something that was in the amulet that would possess you if you wore it. And it would give you, like, access to, I think, basically the hyper-powered, like, hyper-powerful dots of the, I think it was Serpentis, is the kind of sorceress Setite discipline. The problem is that you'd constantly be having to make, like, willpower checks and shit against the very powerful malevolent intelligence in this necklace. But it's like, even though I can't wear it, that's a very powerful cursed object. Whatever shall I do? This was very close to the end of the campaign. Vladislav won with his final gift. And this is where the fact that Vladislav was a nodist came in. Combined with the fact that Vladislav had spent a long time in the memory of Tzimisce, and knew, like, Proto-Aramaic, or whatever. Like, he knew, like, ancient dead languages, like, languages that no one even knew existed. Like, people have forgotten ever existed. Like, he was a fucking genius. And he'd read, like, the Book of Nod. Like, he'd seen it in the memories of Tzimisce. Which, for a Nodist scholar, like, the Book of Nod is incomplete, and that's where, like, the Sabbat and the Camarilla, that's where the Kindred get their notions of, like, the mythology and the religious, the theological history of vampirism, is they got it from these fragments of the Book of Nod, and there's never been a complete copy. Largely because, you know, there's fragments, but they're in languages no one can understand, shit like that. But Vladislav was a Nodist. He had a big library, a cult library, including various copies of the Book of Nod. Like, you know, that either had been, like, transcribed by other people, or that had been, like, his translations. And as the campaign went on over time, especially, like, after the Gehenna thing, after he'd been through the thing, I would set aside some time. And the GM would, like, let me keep track of this. Of, like, he's working on these fragments, like, he's gathering these fragments in, like, languages that I thought, like, expensive, but otherwise, like, mostly worthless, because in languages that no one knows, but he knows this language now, so he can translate it. He never got a complete version of the Book of Nod. However, he won, definitely, this contest of etiquette with this Toreador. Because what he did, what he gave him, I think just as the campaign was wrapping up, like, he was about to leave the city. Because everything was going to shit. And he was like, I'm out. I'm going home. But what Vladislav gave him was using, you know, these fragments that he'd gotten over the you know, the campaign that he'd translated using his, like, knowledge of, like, Proto-Aramaic or whatever. And, like, ancient Babylonian or whatever, like, all these ancient dead languages. He gave him an English translation. Like, by far, the most complete English translation of the Book of Nod that had existed to anyone's awareness as far as that campaign was concerned. And the Toreador, Goodwin, was desperately trying to figure out whether he should be elated, because that's an amazing thing to have, or furious. Because he knew, in his heart of hearts, that he had disgraced the entirety of Clan Toreador that day, because he had to give up and concede that no one could do etiquette better, etiquette and generosity better than that Tzimisce, and therefore the Tzimisce had won. I consider myself to have won that campaign, even though that campaign ended with all the characters disappearing out of the city and hiding and waiting until Gehenna finished. Because he beat the clan, because he beat Clan Toreador at politeness. Yeah. He was a fun character, Vladislav. He survived that campaign. Yeah, Mastiff didn't, but Vladislav did. I don't think I've had a character die since then in one of those campaigns. They all tend to run away and like kind of ride off into the sunset before their lives end, which is nice. I prefer my characters getting. You know, they have their last ride and then they leave. You know, I prefer that to a character death. I don't know, it feels more hopeful. Vladislav actually, much like Mastiff, became an NPC in that setting later on. His mansion was actually just off of a park. Because he lived in a huge mansion and he had, like, these two ghoul servants. And his mansion was a whole thing. Like, his mansion had weird security systems in it. Like, it had guttering all over the place that no one could ever explain. But it was explicitly so he could, like, just appear in random rooms of the house because he would just slop around it in blood form. And just kind of appear, and like the front half of it was beautiful and opulently decorated, but there was this huge scary iron door like in the middle of the main hall, and then like the second half of the house was dilapidated and shitty and covered in like meat and blood and shit. Like behind that door was his area, like his personal area, that looked like what you thought a Tzimisce Fleshcrafter's house would look like. He did have monsters as well. Like at one point his house was raided by the Sabbat, and he just like lobotomized shitloads of shovel heads, and that was kind of what he did in his downtime. He just like went into his basement, his like reinforced basement, and just like made them into monsters to see if he could. I mean, he made himself into monsters as well. He did some like crazy shit with his organs. But yeah, I'm not going to go into that because this video is about an hour long. I will say this though, since I'm about to leave. I've been thinking about something. I'm curious as to if you guys would be interested. I've been thinking, because I'm done recording Vampire. Like, Vampire's done now. But I know that there's, you know, a lot of interest in it, and I've got more shit to say. So I'm thinking of maybe doing, kind of presented like this, but go for like half an hour at max for each video. Just kind of my thoughts, like a summary, and then my thoughts on each of the clans. That I care about, so the Ravenos won't be in there, but like clans and bloodlines. So just kind of talking about those rather than, you know, just kind of summaries and discussion on the individual clans. Maybe have that be a series, you know, because it's something I'd like to talk about and, you know, capitalise on the interest in Vampire the Masquerade while it's there. So yeah, if you watched this, let me know. Let me know in the comments if that'd be something you'd enjoy. And I might do it. I don't know. Well, there are definitely more stories I could do from my time playing Vampire. I'll just need to, like, figure out. I can tell you, actually, and you know what? I think what the next one will be, it'll be a lot shorter, but I'll talk about the time I played a Tremere. A guy called a Damien St. Clair, who had a terrible American accent, which is basically me doing the exact same accent that our GM used for Mr. Armstrong, who was the Prince of New York. So we had to listen to this accent constantly whenever we talked to the prince. But yeah, I might tell you about Tremere. More specifically, because he didn't have too many crazy stories, but what he did have was he had the crazy story of what the fuck was going on with his house. Which, when I say a Tremere and the crazy story of what the fuck was going on with his house, I think you might find that interesting. And just kind of talking about the ways the hoops I had to jump through in order to make my ideal Tremere chantry, essentially, with all the mindfuck bullshit you'd expect from a Tremere chantry. That would be a much shorter video, but I think that might be the next one I do. Because that's like the next thing I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, I've enjoyed this, but I think we're done here for now.